This afternoon, at the urging of Donald Trump, the man who negotiated a lenient sentence for convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein sought to recast that deal in light of new charges of sex trafficking that have been brought against Epstein by the Southern District of New York. Acosta fighting for his reputation among human beings with a conscience. News accounts today suggest that Donald Trump is giving zero consideration to firing Acosta at this moment for letting an accused child sexual predator off easy when he served as U.S. Attorney in Miami. In a news conference a little over an hour ago at the Department of Labor, Acosta claimed that without the intervention of his office, Epstein would have walked free and suggested a different climate on victims of sexual assault in 2002 was to blame.
Did you make this same agreement today?
So these questions are always very difficult because we now have 12 years of knowledge and hindsight, and we live in a very different world. Today's world treats victims very, very differently. Today's world does not allow some of the victim shaming that could have taken place at trial 12 years ago. Today's world understands that when interviewing victims, when eliciting testimony, that testimony can be sometimes contradictory, that memories are difficult. And so I don't think we can say, take a case that is this old and fully know how it would play out today.
But it wasn't 1910. One of the most egregious aspects of the sweetheart deal negotiated by Acosta for Epstein was that it kept victims in the dark. Asked today if he would apologize to Epstein's victims, Acosta said he would not, and he did not. Our colleague Savannah Guthrie bringing the plight and the suffering of Epstein's victims into focus on the Today Show this morning in an interview with a new accuser who says Jeffrey Epstein raped her when she was 15.
I was terrified, and I was telling him to stop. Please stop, And
did he?
No, he did not stop. He had no intentions of stopping, and that's what he wanted, that's what he got.
When you left there, you never went back?
After that day, no, I never went back. I was terrified. I was really scared, because I didn't want that to happen again.
And you left school. Did you leave the school because it was in the same neighborhood?
Yeah, it was so close.
In your mind, did you use the word rape? Did you recognize it then as rape?
No, I don't think I did. I just thought, it's my fault. I was obligated, that's just what you're supposed to do. So I really did not know better.
When did you stop blaming yourself?
It was a long time, really.
Did Jeffrey Epstein rape you?
Yeah, no, he raped me. Forcefully raped me, but knew exactly what he was doing. And I don't think cared. What hurts even more so is that if I wasn't afraid to come forward sooner, then maybe he wouldn't have done it to other girls. I feel really guilty. To this day, I feel really guilty.
Tragically, the disturbing story shared by that brave young woman is just one of dozens. The Miami Herald reported this back in November. Quote, the Herald identified 80 women who say they were molested or otherwise sexually abused by Epstein between 2001 and 2006. About 60 of them were located. Now they're scattered around the country and abroad. 8 of them agreed to be interviewed on or off the record. 4 of them were willing to speak on video. The women are now mothers, wives, nurses, bartenders, realtors, hairdressers, and teachers. One, a Hollywood actress. Several have grappled with trauma, depression, and addiction. Some have served time in prison. A few did not survive. One young woman was found dead last year in a rundown motel in West Palm Beach. She overdosed on heroin and left behind a young son. The victims of Jeffrey Epstein and the Trump cabinet official accused of betraying them in the face of Epstein's high-powered legal defense team are where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us on set in Washington, Axios national political reporter Jonathan Swan, national political reporter for The Washington Post, Robert Costa is here, editor-in-chief of The Bulwark, Charlie Sykes. We're also joined by former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance and New York Times White House correspondent Annie Carney. Joyce Vance, take me through what I understood Alex Acosta to be trying to say, which was that the media didn't report this accurately, that somehow 2008 was an era where these crimes were not, I don't know, prosecuted as forcefully as they are now. Is that what he was trying to say? And is that remotely true? Chuck Rosenberg, friend of this show, friend of all of ours, says not so.
I agree with Chuck pretty firmly. Federal prosecutors' obligation to protect child victims wasn't any different in 2007 and 2008 than it is today. I'm sorry if Acosta felt like the case would have been difficult to prosecute, but I know his office. It's a fine office. They take on hard cases and get convictions every day, and this case should have been no different. This is not a garden variety case. This is not a case where maybe you decide it's not important enough to prosecute. This is dozens of child victims of sex assaults. This case is the reason federal prosecutors exist, to prosecute this exact kind of case. And he frankly stared this case in the eye and blinked and walked away and let these victims down.
Joyce, he also seemed to put out some false binary choices that and he seemed to make it sound like all U.S. attorneys face a false, or I've been told it's false, a choice between either taking a lenient sentence or nothing. Is it really all or nothing? I mean, why couldn't the FBI and federal investigators and prosecutors keep the case open?
Right, that's exactly right. There's no binary choice that's being made here. If you don't have enough evidence in the face of these sorts of serious, credible allegations, you continue to investigate. And so when Acosta in the press conference today says how happy he is that there's newly discovered evidence that permits the Southern District of New York to prosecute Epstein, it's just appalling to hear that, because that evidence was available. His investigators could have found it. He had determined local police investigators. He had the FBI. He simply cut the case off prematurely.
Joyce, he's also making it sound like these are two different points in time. The Southern District of New York gathered evidence for the exact same period of time for which Labor Secretary Alex Acosta agreed to basically one night a week in prison for Jeffrey Epstein, right? They investigated the same period of time.
Right. That's, I think, very close to right. There may be a little bit of new allegation in the New York case, but it's primarily an overlap. In other words, the Southern District of New York has spoken pretty loudly here. They've said that they think former U.S. Attorney Acosta got it wrong, should have prosecuted the case as a federal matter, and now they're cleaning it up many years later. And as the victim who spoke with Savannah Guthrie, I think, so eloquently said, you know, the burden should never have been on the victims here. The burden was on the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of Florida to bring this man to justice and end the conduct.
Annie Carney, you and your colleague Maggie Haberman have some tremendous reporting out today about the long history between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, and we're going to get to that later in the show. But I want to ask you about something that your colleagues in New York reported yesterday, that essentially U.S. Attorney Jeff Berman, who's a U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, was rebuking the Acosta plea agreement in his announcement yesterday. And I wonder what the fallout is now, 24 hours from that sort of event.
I mean, it was a rebuke, and what we saw Acosta doing today was trying to mount a defense and save himself. I think that we saw a performance that, in some sense, he expressed an outline of his position. He presented it calmly. I don't know if that was what Trump was looking for. This was an audience of one presentation here. He conducted the press conference at Trump's request. Trump basically said it's up to him to save himself. So this was for Trump. And he took questions. He tried to get to all the questions and answer them. And we'll see if Trump was convinced by this performance. But he is certainly hanging on the ropes. Trump publicly said he's standing with him, but behind the scenes, it's much more tenuous than his public proclamation of support for Acosta. So we can have our fact checks of what he said, but Trump probably is watching for the style he presented in. Did he look strong? Did he look like he can keep fighting? And we'll see.
Robert Costa, you agree with that assessment?
The president knows Congress, House Democrats want to call the secretary up to Capitol Hill to get answers. And it won't be an interview and it won't be a press conference. It'll be hostile House Democrats taking on him and his record as an attorney. This was his opportunity, as Andy said, to set the record straight. I have a few sources around the president I was checking in with text message before this program. One of them texted "the world?" ? What they meant was, what is the secretary talking about? There is the law, and then there is the law. The world is context. What does that even mean? And that's something that House Democrats would happily peel away, the idea of the world, because they live in the world of the law.
It's a tragedy, and I don't doubt Bob's assessment, but it's a tragedy that only Democrats are expected to question a lenient sentence for a convicted and admitted child predator.
Well, if this press conference was supposed to put an end to that or to answer those questions, I think it failed. And whatever the president was hoping for from this press conference, he's going to wait to see what the reviews are. Right. He's going to see how people respond to it. And I don't think the reviews are going to be very good. The secretary did not apologize. I think he came off as quite tone deaf. There was a lot of revisionist history there, a lot of excuse making. And the longer this goes on, the more trouble it creates for Donald Trump, because we're going to be focused on Alex Acosta and how he handled and mishandled this case, but it also means we're going to be talking about this oligarchy of sleaze, which involve people like Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump himself. So I think the reviews are going to be decisive, and frankly, I'm having a hard time imagining Donald Trump watching that presentation and thinking that's my guy.
I agree, but for different reasons. I mean, I think that Donald Trump looks for defiance, looks for almost a reordering of the facts. He was neither. What he did today is not going to satisfy Democrats, who are not going to buy that in 2008 you couldn't prosecute sex crimes, but neither will it satisfy the right-wing nuts.
President Trump, I was talking this morning to someone who's very close to him, who has been talking to him about this, and they were very, very confident. That was the quote I used. They said, zero.
I was quoting you.
The chance
zero
that,
chance
that Trump will fire him over this, zero. It was quite interesting because I spoke a few hours later to someone who has been with the president, even in the intervening period, has been in touch with him. And they said, I wouldn't use the word zero. Maybe like put an asterisk on that one. Like, I don't know about zero. I'm not, I wouldn't dispute that. It doesn't look like at the moment. But President Trump made clear that he wanted to see, Annie's reporting is exactly right. Maggie Haberman was first to report this, that Trump himself urged and, in fact, demanded that Alex Acosta do that press conference. The thing about Donald Trump is people are okay until they're not. And he's always looking up at the television. And when a story becomes a problem, this was the Michael Flynn situation. He loved Michael Flynn. But, day after day of seeing negative segment on Michael Flynn, he's going to, at some point, and the real question is there enough of a firm footing underneath him when that moment happens, if it does? Because, as we've reported and as others have reported, Alex Acosta is not the favourite son inside the Trump administration. People like Mick Mulvaney, I thought it was very amusing when Alex Acosta said, Mick Mulvaney called me and said that we've got a great relationship. Give me a break. Mick Mulvaney has been very dissatisfied with the slow speed of deregulation going on at Labor. The Conservative movement as a whole, in terms of many Conservative leaders on the outside, are very unhappy with him. So he doesn't have a lot of allies and friends inside this administration. It's actually the president who's probably got the best relationship with him. Trump quite likes him. But that could easily change.
So we've got the three of the best reporters on the beat here, and two brilliant minds in Charlie and Joyce. And I really want to pin you guys down on something. Donald Trump watched Christine Blasey Ford testify before his Supreme Court pick, Brett Kavanaugh, testified. And Donald Trump was reported by one or all of you to have gone shaky in that intervening period. And what brought him, or to have found Christine Blasey Ford compelling, and to have been waiting with bated breath for Kavanaugh's performance, which he then found equally compelling, and he stood by his man. Does Acosta, Annie, rise to the Kavanaugh performance, which in that instance tilted to Trump?
That's exactly the example I was going to bring up, and that's what was in the back of my head as I watched him take the podium today. Trump was shaky on Kavanaugh. This was another example of you go out there and you defend yourself, and we'll see how you survive. And it's when Kavanaugh became angry, started fighting back, that I heard from people in the White House saying he's loving it. This is what he wants to see. This is the demeanor he was hoping for, and he completely loved Kavanaugh's performance when he became angry and shouting and belligerent. We didn't see that kind of angry performance from Acosta. He was measured. He was soft-spoken. He laid out an argument. His voice didn't tremble, and he seemed confident, but it wasn't the same kind of how dare you challenge me pose that Kavanaugh took. And so it depends. It's not the same style that appealed to Trump in the past.
And I guess I only bring this up, and I'm not advocating for rage. I'm just saying that I accept all your reporting that this was for an audience of one. You shook your head, though. You disagree?
Well, no, I just disagree with, I don't think Trump was as shaky on Kavanaugh as some people have suggested. He was much more inclined to think that the whole thing was a hoax. That was the word he kept using. And in fact, when Trump talks about the Kavanaugh situation privately, I'm told he recounts the rally he did where he proudly
mocked her.
That he sees that as the seminal moment in saving Kavanaugh. So he actually takes credit for it himself. And, you know, to the extent to which President Trump was shaky on Kavanaugh, it was really just that he didn't approve of the fact that he was a drinker. That was something that and the sort of the sloppiness of the crying and things like that. But I don't think at any point he was that close to pulling.
But it's the counteroffensive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also after Access Hollywood. You know, when he thinks he turned that around, obviously he did turn it around at the debate. When he went back at the Clintons, he likes to see people on the offense, not on the defense. And so if you apply the Kavanaugh template to this press conference, no, it would have fallen short.
But Secretary Acosta is a federal official. There's an ongoing investigation by the federal government. You can't have a federal official, even if he wants to, on a personal level, rage against these kind of...
Oh, I agree with you, 100%. Right. I'm just saying, I accept what you're all reporting, that this was a performance ordered up by the president and delivered for an audience of one. I mean, we broadcast it because it's news, but this was for and by Donald Trump. And I guess my question for you is, does he seems to be someone who cares about his reputation. He seems to be kind of a handful. He's not family. He's not son-in-law. He's someone who, in his mind, Alex Acosta had a reputation. George W. Bush, I believe, appointed him to that post as U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of Florida. He's someone who thinks that he enjoys respect from the conservative legal community. I don't think he wants his career ended by having cover from a president who's credibly accused of sexual assault by 19 women. I mean, is that if that's all he's got, is that good news for Alex Acosta?
And his friends also say he doesn't have the capacity to do anything but what he did today. He's a low-key lawyer. This is not someone who was on the campaign. This is not a friend of President Trump. He's a lawyer. He made some decisions over a decade ago that continue to haunt him in his career, and they will be part of his legacy. But in terms of responding to President Trump, this is who he is.
Joyce, we are covering the world as it exists because everyone here covers Donald Trump, but the world as it should be. We should be covering a president or a White House or a Secretary of Labor who once served as a prosecutor, who's saving all their condemnation and fire for the monster in this story, and that's Jeffrey Epstein. Is it stunning to you, as a former federal prosecutor, that no one's talking about Donald Trump being repulsed by Epstein's alleged conduct?
You know, it is so hard, I think, to avoid the comparison between Epstein and Trump. Of course, one is under indictment, the other is not, but there are similar and credible allegations of this kind of conduct. And somehow Epstein becomes a little bit of a marker for Trump here. And Trump's inability to fire Acosta in the face of the way he conducted this investigation is, I think, something that looks very personal to Trump. It's impossible to separate the two.
Go ahead.
I think we should be clear. One of them is an industrial-scale pedophile and sex trafficker. Just a small distinction. But with Acosta, I mean, the thing that really I think a lot of people will be horrified about today was the sort of like the world has changed, almost as if it was like trying to align this with the Me Too movement. This was sex trafficking and pedophilia at an industrial scale.
Yeah.
I mean, I just feel like this is sort of being glossed over. And the next step for this reporting, I mean, Miami Herald did God's work here, bringing this back, because there was a miscarriage of justice under Acosta. And the next step for reporters is to carefully and methodically and meticulously unmask every last person who covered for him, who enabled Epstein, who allowed this to happen, who knew about it. And there should be a lot of people around this country right now in the elite circles who are very scared right now.
Well, let's start right there, because what Julie Brown does report on, and something that Acosta was asked about, was Jay Lefkowitz, who was one of Epstein's lawyers. He's my interested disclosure, my former colleague in the Bush White House. He was an attorney at Kirkland & Ellis. He's the individual that Acosta described meeting with at a hotel 70 miles from the U.S. Attorney's office. He played it off as though he had a speech there. He may or may not have. But, I mean, if we're going back to Julie Brown's heroic reporting, and the prosecutors in New York cited Julie Brown's reporting, so that's not us as other people in the media landscape holding her up. Federal prosecutors have now held her up. I mean, why should Acosta stand in that room and get any credit, even from Trump, for covering for someone who, as you said, ran an industrial-scale pedophilia ring?
Well, of course he shouldn't.
So where? I mean, what has the White House had to say today?
They have been pretty quiet on this because, of course, there's a complication there, because Donald Trump has a long history of being friends with Jeffrey Epstein and is on the record saying he's a terrific guy in an interview.
All the more reason
Bill
for him to
Clinton,
distance
these flights. I mean, I thought it was pretty curious that Bill Clinton used the excuse of his staff being around, as if that's ever been a barrier. I mean, this story has a long way to go, and it's now the concentric circles around Epstein that are going to be investigated.
And Annie Carney has something there. Well, go ahead.
No, I mean, I guess that would be a reason why this White House would want to distance itself from this story as quickly and decisively as possible. Does the White House want to have this be an ongoing story about their administration? Because, you know, as the blast radius of this story, you know, expands, Donald Trump is there. And this will bring back some of the worst moments of his campaign. It will track with a lot of the concerns about Donald Trump. And as you point out, the Me Too movement was huge. But when you're talking about industrial-grade pedophilia, there's not going to be the kind of tribal divide over this. So
you sure?
Well, we haven't seen it so far. And so the question is...
Robert Acosta just said Democrats are expected to grill him on Capitol Hill. I imagine...
Well, I'll give someone great credit. Penny Nance, who is she is no one's liberal. She's a conservative movement leader, was actually one of the first to call for Alex Acosta's resignation back in December. She called for it 6 or 7 months before the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Yes, it's true Republicans aren't out calling for the resignation, but I agree. I don't think there is the same tribal divide as we've seen with some of these other...
Oh, God.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.